So Ryan, it was really interesting the other day. I was with a client, and I'm a bit old-fashioned because I still carry around this notepad, right?
Hmm.
And I do, I, and I'm showing this to everybody, assuming that they can see this on YouTube because we're now on YouTube. Everybody, go to YouTube, the Intuitive Customer Podcast, and you can basically see I draw lots of stuff,
I
right,
think
on
we're
my notepad.
overselling the YouTube, Colin. I just saw the notepad that you flashed and your doodles on there. I got to tell you,
Yeah,
people, if you're just listening to audio and you're thinking about pausing and going over to YouTube for that, yeah,
it was well worth it, mate, because
okay, okay.
some of those pictures are going to. It's a bit like a Banksy. They're going to be well worth lots of money in the future. So.
So for those who missed it, there was a series of boxes and arrows that Colin drew, kind of a spider web pattern, maybe an
Spider
octopus.
web patterns, yeah.
So
So
no, but go ahead. It does. I mean, it does help crystallize a lot when you can kind of draw a diagram
it
and put
does,
ideas together. So
it does, and I think it makes it personal, and I've rather than just try to explain something. It's the old thing about a picture speaks a thousand words. So I tend to, if I'm talking about a model or something, I tend to just draw it out in front of the client and explain it basically. And one of the really interesting things, and this ties into the show today, one of the things I've found is that when a client then picks up the pen
hmm.
and starts adding to your drawing,
Mm.
yeah, or asking questions or adding a thought, that really is, for me, becomes a bit of a turning point to
Yeah,
show that they are truly engaged and thinking about it. And this goes to Jason Bradley, who's written in to and given us a pickle, which, and his pickle is, how do I decode when a customer has mentally decided to buy?
yeah,
So, how does he decode when a customer has mentally decided to buy? And as I read that pickle, and if you want to ask Ryan and I a question, a pickle, if you've got a pickle that what you want us to deliberate on, then just go to beyondphilosophy.com/pickle. That's beyondphilosophy.com/pickle. We'll put the stuff in the show notes. Um, then when I read that, I thought, yeah, that for me is one of the signs that they are adding to the model, they're adding to the thought, and I even now purposely, when I'm got my piece of paper, I now purposely put the pen towards their
mm,
side where they're sitting to encourage them to do it, because
that's
I
very
think
clever.
it gets their thought process going, doesn't it?
Yeah, you'll hear various kind of verbal or physical tells that people will sometimes give out. Like I've heard of
Yeah.
consultants who say that when they're in a sales process and they hear the potential customer switch from talking about you and what you do to we and what we will
Yes.
do, that's kind of an indication that they've made that mental switch to
Yes.
being
Yes.
kind of committed to this process.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's a couple of other. So I know we're gonna talk some theory in a moment behind this, but there's a couple of other things that I think, going back to Jason's pickle. How do you tell when a customer's mentally decided to buy? When they start asking, I find when they start asking you much more detailed questions.
Yeah.
So rather than just talking top level, things like, well, how would we implement that,
Yep.
or when would we expect delivery, or what's the payment terms going to be, or who's going to do this now, and how do you work? How would we work this and that together? It's like they've made that mental choice and are already in that environment where they're trying to then grapple with the problems that new environment. So I've already decided that I'm buying this,
Yeah.
um, but I'm now grappling with that problem of, well, how do we link that together and link that together, and how do I start? Another common one for me is, well, how do I link the brand together, or how do we get other people engaged with this, so they've recognized that um, they've mentally made that jump, but other people in the organization haven't. And they've even gone into going, yeah, well, I'm going to have a problem with selling it to this person over here,
Right.
but that person over there is going to be help and be an advantage. So how do we start positioning this? Um, so
So I know that you said that we were going to get into the theory in a little
yeah,
bit, but you just explained the whole theory that I wanted to bring up in talking
there you go.
about this pickle,
It's
just
going to be
without
a very
using.
quick podcast then today, is it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, you explained it very clearly, but without using the complicated psychology terms that
Ah.
I get paid big bucks for introducing. So I'm going to make it less clear now. You made it clear. I'm going to make it less clear, and then you can come
Great.
around at the end if you want and try to
Yep.
clear it back up.
That's it. Do your professor bit and make it less
Thank you.
clear. I'm sure your students love that.
I need to get a pipe. Now that we're on YouTube, I need to I need to hold a pipe,
Yeah.
get a
Maybe it's one
cardigan
of
with some suede patches on the elbows.
one of those Sherlock Holmes
Yeah,
ones.
exactly, exactly. Like
And
a
what are those
studious
hats
pipe.
that Sherlock Holmes
No, I'm
Holmes
not. I'm
wears?
not a detective. I'm a professor. Ugh, you're getting your stereotypes all wrong. All right. So, what you just described is something that some psychologists, a model that psychologists have developed over the decades, that's known as the Rubicon model,
Right.
which I complain a lot about how poorly psychologists name their theories. I actually think this is a pretty clever name.
Okay.
So
Cool.
I give them full credit for that. So the Rubicon, if you remember your Roman history, is a river in Italy, and
Yep.
under the Roman Republic laws, they had all of these very powerful generals in various parts of the Roman Empire. And the rule was if you were one of these very powerful generals, you could come to Rome whenever you needed to, but your army had to stay north of the Rubicon. So if you
Ah.
brought your
Right.
army with you, that was seen as an act of rebellion. You were committing treason. You could be put to death. And so, very famously, Julius Caesar, when he went to seize control of the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic and turn it into an empire, he crossed the Rubicon. And that was like the point of no return. As soon as he brought his army across that river, he had now committed treason and they were fully committed. Right? So, I know you love it when I diverge into history, Colin,
It
on your.
this is fascinating stuff. So,
I,
and
I
this was
thank you. I love this stuff. So, this is what they named that psychological model after.
right.
They said that psychologically, if we are making a decision, we're trying to debate, we're trying to deliberate, we're trying to think about what's going on here, and then at some point we commit to a decision. And they said that's like crossing the Rubicon. And what
Right.
happens is when we mentally commit to a decision, we don't have to have actually like signed a contract or have like verbally committed to anything. It's a
Sure.
switch in mindset. And
Right.
once we've done that, our perspective changes completely. And
Right.
we now think about things very differently. So
Right.
the two major, they call them action phases, two major action phases before and after this Rubicon are there's a deliberative mindset. That's before we've committed to a decision. And then the implementation mindset. That's what happened afterwards. So
Right.
going back to what you were saying, Colin, you were saying that you knew that your clients had committed when they started asking implementation questions like,
Yep.
how are we going to implement this? Like, who's
Yeah.
going to be involved? What's the next step in the process? Like, they get to like tactical stuff, like how much is it going to cost? A lot of these are implementation. It's a sign that they've already decided, and then now they want to get to it. They want to
Yeah.
really like start figuring out the nuts and bolts of it. So,
Right.
anything you want to unclear or make clear again after I've uncleared it up?
No, so the bit I was thinking of is whilst we're talking here for Jason's pickle, which is, how does he know when a customer's mentally decided? I guess the reality is that's true in a lot of the things that any decision. I don't know if I should use the word any. but a lot of the decisions that we make.
Yes.
So I was just thinking politics, which way am I going to vote?
Yes.
Yeah, you may hear a debate, you may hear something where somebody said something where you actually go, or maybe it's just a debate about something actually, where you go, yeah, I think this now, and
Hmm.
you've crossed that Rubicon.
Yeah. I mean, so yes, this is not a psychological theory that was designed around the sales process. This is a general purpose theory that describes most decisions. Right. So the politics one is a very interesting one. So I've got a list here of what previous research has found
Right.
in terms of what.
Before you get onto that, can
Yeah.
I just
Go
tell
ahead. Go
you
ahead.
that I think my wife has got a ferry that she takes back and forth across the Rubicon because she seems to change her mind quite a lot.
Yeah. So that can happen too. So it's not like these mindsets are powerful,
Yeah.
but they're not uh, like perfectly constricting, right? It's a
So it's
shift
not
in
like
perspective.
one way where
Yeah,
you,
exactly. There's no like
right.
ratcheting where we've made it. It's like a permanent. We've all had those situations where like your wife, where you've made a decision, you're committing to it, and then you get cold feet and you step back, or
Yeah.
you like reconsider, you're not sure. So yeah, think about these in terms of mindsets of cognitive procedures, right? And we're going to activate one or we're going to activate the other. It's usually the case that crossing the Rubicon like creates momentum
Yeah.
and it's a signal that we've made a decision, but most decisions can be undone and reevaluated. So it's a
I
very
think
good
the
point.
other,
I'm glad you raised it.
I think the other thing is, and I'll let you get on with your list in a minute, but I think the other thing I would say is that it's interesting, isn't it, that when you listen to somebody make a point, I found that the last person that was speaking, I I I won't say I tend to, but
Yeah.
you go, that's a good point. I never really
Yeah.
thought about it from that, and you go, all right. So, and that sort of goes into Jason's piece because if we're pitching against two or three other organizations, I will always want to go last
Hmm.
because I feel that that gives us it's I want to give them the last message.
Yeah.
Now, again, internally we debate it. I don't think going first is ever a good idea. But if given a choice, I would always say I'd rather go last
Yeah.
because so I guess the interesting bit there is, and maybe this comes into recency. Does this come into recency bias, which is
Yeah.
you remember the thing that you were last speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a number of things that could play into that. Recency bias is certainly one of them. So this is a memory effect that says that you tend to remember the last bit of information that went into long-term memory. So I
Yeah,
think that plays into it. I think we could also tell a reference point story where we're now being evaluated. If you're the first one to present, a lot of times there's nothing to compare you to. Whereas if you're the last one to present, now you can like kind of strategically compete against those other reference points to try to be.
sure.
But I do think there's a Rubicon model story here as well, which is that if you're the company that's hiring, if you're the client, and you know that you're going to be getting pitches from three or four different companies, then for the first few, you are going to try to keep yourself in that deliberative mindset. You're going to try to deliberately keep an open mind so that you can be like making this decision. If you know it's the last one that you're seeing, now you may be in more of a position to start to switch over to that implementation mindset. There's not that pressure to keep your mind open. The
Right.
danger is if the presentation that went right before you is really really knocked their socks off,
Yes.
they may already be in an implementation mindset by
Well,
the
they've
time
already, yeah. And
it's
there are disadvantages, not
yeah
least of which is that everybody's overrun, and then now you've only
yeah
got 20 minutes to present, and everybody else had 45 minutes, and all
all of
those other
those
wonderful
things.
things. So, yeah, just practicalities of things sometimes. But yeah,
So let me go back to the point that you raised about political decision making, which I think is
yeah, sure.
a good one. So one of the differences that's been found is when people are in a deliberative mindset before they've made a decision, they're much more open minded. And then once you've made a decision, one of the things that people tend to do is they tend to get defensive around their decisions. So once
Yeah.
you've committed to something, those cognitive gears switch over, and now you don't want more options. You don't want
Sure.
to like know what's best. You want to feel confident that you made the right choice. And so we
Sure.
get very defensive about that kind of thing.
Sure.
So you see this a lot in politics where somebody who's undecided and goes into a debate can be persuaded one way or the other. But if you've already decided and you see a debate, you're going to walk away from that debate very likely convinced that your candidate is the best choice. And you may feel
Yeah.
even stronger about that, regardless of how the debate went. And so you're going to have partisans on both sides saying, well, clearly this debate showed that my candidate was the best. And clearly,
Yeah.
and that's the sign of an implementation mindset. You've already decided, and now you want to be confident about that. You want to be kind of
And I guess
closed-minded and
that,
focused.
so by definition, because I was thinking as you were speaking, then I was thinking, yeah, that's confirmation bias, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So
So
implementation mindset makes you
is
much more
confirmation bias.
prone to confirmation bias. In fact, there was a study that they did where they asked people um, to list pros and cons around some decision options. And
Yeah.
they took people that were either still considering what to do or people who had already decided what to do. And if you were in this deliberation phase, you listed about equal numbers of pros and cons. If you're in an implementation phase, you'd already made the decision. People listed 5 times as many pros as cons. Like
So I
you
guess
shut that down.
that's an interesting bit, isn't it? Because if
Yeah.
you go back to Jason's point, okay, if and he's talking about this from a sales perspective. So how do I decode when a customer mentally decided to buy? Um, I guess if you were to ask the customer to list the pros and cons of one solution over another, if
Yeah.
they listed more things from
Yep.
your perspective, then that would give you an indication that they've crossed the Rubicon.
Yep. I mean, there's some social pressure aspects there too. A lot of people
Sure.
might be too polite to
Yeah.
list top cons. But one of the signs that people have like convinced themselves is that they will start convincing themselves, or I should say that
Yeah.
they've already made a decision, is they'll start to
Yeah.
sell themselves on the solution. Right. So if you
Yeah.
see them arguing your side, that's often a sign that they've switched over and are now in this
Mm.
kind of defensive mode where they
Yeah.
can right?
Yeah.
So if there are negative things to sell or to that have to be disclosed about your offering, sometimes if you can get people into that implementation mindset where they've already made the decision, then when you reveal that negative information, sometimes people will be more inclined to argue their own way out of it because they've
Yeah.
already decided.
Yeah. No, good point. Good point.
So, other differences that have been found in the research, people who are in a deliberative mode are more interested in what's called desirability information. So, like
Okay.
what makes an option attractive or not attractive. Whereas once they've already made the decision, they're more interested in what's called feasibility information. So,
Right.
what do we need to make this thing happen? What do we need to make this thing be implemented? People respond better to more abstract information when they're in a deliberative mode. They kind of are
Right.
thinking more higher order, thinking about how things fit together, and then they respond to more concrete information in implementation
Right.
mode. So again, this
So
this is
that's
useful
the
from a
bit
sales
where
perspective. Go ahead.
I was saying they're asking more detailed questions.
Yeah, exactly. So the research backs that up. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Um, and again, this gives you some insight into the sales process as well. So
Sure.
there will definitely be exceptions to this. Expertise is maybe one boundary condition on this. But for a lot of stuff, if you go in with the hard numbers, in many cases people are not cognitively prepared for that, right? And so
Sure.
if you talk to them instead about the higher order goals, like this is
Sure.
what this thing can do for you, these are the benefits it'll offer, and then
Yeah.
once we get down to implementation, after they've made the decision, then you can get into the details.
But I guess it's also then clearly about the benefits that are beneficial to and I'm trying to be careful here with my words, the benefits to the person that you are talking to.
Yes, as
So
opposed
that,
to
well, so I could be going in and talking to a decision maker who is worried about, um, the type of project team that you're putting on this, and how it's going to be received, and how they're going to be measured, etc., etc. Or I could be talking to the finance person who's going to be worried about the numbers that underpin it. So the benefits to get them, each of those people to cross the Rubicon, I'm having to my argument to the decision maker is going to be different to my argument to the finance person.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the benefits need to be still relevant to whoever you're
Yeah,
talking to.
yeah,
And they can be abstract, but again, they can't be like, world peace level abstract. They still need to be
yeah, sure,
relevant to those specific decision makers for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Some more things that the
yeah.
research has found.
Please,
Preference for action. So if you
okay,
get somebody on the other side of the table who says, "All right, well, what's the next step?" That's a pretty good sign, right? That they've
yeah,
switched over from deliberation to
sure,
implementation. Um, and then the last one I've got here on my list is assessment of risks. So
right,
people who are in an implementation mindset um, have more. It says the research says they're more prone to a sense of invulnerability. So in other words,
yeah,
it's like, let's just do this thing. Let's not
sure,
worry about the risks.
yes,
Or alternatively, the controllability of the risks. So like, yeah, I understand that it's risky out there, but like we can handle it. We can control it.
sure,
Those things are much more likely once people have already made the decision. They tend to be much more risk averse when we're still in a deliberation mode. But again, it goes back to this idea that once we've made a decision, there's psychological pressure for us to feel like we've made the right decision. And so
yeah,
therefore we tend to become defensive around it.
yeah. No, a good list. Let me. So before the call, before this podcast, I wrote down some of the things that I've noticed. So let's try
Right?
and maybe split those into those two areas. Um, so I find it interesting. One, so typically what happens is we have a call with a client, and they're obviously in that investigation mode.
Yeah.
And then the other interesting bit is, who do they start inviting on the call?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So and what level of person are they inviting on to the call? So I guess if they're in that implementation mode, they're going to be inviting some, let me say, lower level people that are actually going to be in charge of the implementation.
Yeah.
And what you typically find is the calls just get bigger because there's
Yeah.
so many more people on the call. Because by definition, therefore, we start to involve more people as well, because you're now trying to match up the two implementation teams as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could you could see where occasionally somebody higher in the organization might be invited to those calls, but ideally, if they've already made their decision, it'll still be from an implementation standpoint. So I need to get finance involved in this call,
Yes,
but it would be less around because they've got to check out the numbers as opposed to they got to figure out a way to pay for this, right?
yes,
So yeah,
yes.
I agree. Like,
Well, they're also starting in some cases trying to get one step ahead,
yes,
or that they've seen, I don't know. And again, this is I'm focusing this around our work because obviously it's the stuff we know. But maybe something's going on with the brand,
yep,
and there's another project going on somewhere else, and they think it's going to impinge upon that. So we better involve somebody from the brand to talk about it as well. Another one that made me think of, and this is something that I do personally. So this is maybe more consumer orientated, but if I'm buying particularly a bit of technology or a TV or something like that, I end up knowing more about the bloody product than the
yeah,
salesperson.
yep,
Which to me is an indication that I've already decided which bloody one to buy. Right? I know the difference between and typically this happens with televisions, because you go into the Best Buys and everything else, and they don't know enough about the different nuances with some of the products. But you end up knowing more about the bloody product than
yep,
they do, which is, I've already made the decision. So the interesting bit there is, I've already made the decision on what television to buy in the case of a TV. It's just a question of where am I going to buy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very much an implementation question.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Very true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also there's also the cases that example reminded me where sometimes there's a shift in the information that people want away from convincing me to now what information can I get from you so that I can convince others, right?
Oh,
So
yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah. No,
yeah,
absolutely.
okay. Now
Yeah.
how can I convince my VP to get on board with this, or how can I
Yeah.
convince
No.
my
And
wife to get on board with this?
yeah. No. We spend a lot of time once, and typically what happens with us is that we have someone who's really interested,
Yep,
and they're on board, but they also then know that they've got to sell it internally,
yep,
and therefore it's can you help me sell it basically, or can you give me the data that I need because I know what this person's going to be driven by, so I need to do that. It made me also think as we were talking about this because I've come at this mentally from a sort of face to face perspective, but it made me think of from a digital perspective you'd probably be able to pick up the patterns of either going for the same reasons, going down into more detail, you'd probably be able to pick up the customer journeys of implementation type things about deliveries and maybe even what the warranty covers or those types of things. And maybe even the amount of times that the same customer has gone back to your site would be an indication that
yeah,
they've made the decision to to buy.
yeah. Especially if you can figure out where on your site they've been, right? Like how much into the details are they digging in? Are they looking more at the information on
Yeah,
how it's implemented and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to the high level benefits information
yeah.
earlier on in the webpage.
I used to run when I used to be as you're aware employed at British Telecom years and years ago, 30 years ago now. Show me age. And we had a guy there that used to do.
Long enough ago that it was British Telegraph, or not that long.
Yeah, no, not that long ago.
Okay.
But
British
the
Semaphore.
yeah,
Sorry, I'll let you talk. Yeah.
there was a guy there that did sales training for us.
Mhm.
Okay, um, and he used to talk about Death Valley,
Mhm.
which I always thought was an interesting concept, and maybe Jason, this would be useful to you as well. And this is when you're selling large,
Mhm.
I won't say systems, but large projects.
Mhm.
Okay, and basically what Death Valley is when you've put your proposal in and you then can't talk to the customer.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've had all of those interesting conversations. You've had the 57 million people on the call. You've got the people that are really pro it. You've got some that are anti it. You've gone through the Rubicon. Some people are on one side of the shore. Some people are on the other side of the
Yeah.
shore. You put the proposal in, and now the organisation is debating it. One of the things that this guy, I always remember his name actually, Dermot Bradley, he said that you need a plan for Death Valley.
Mhm.
And Death Valley was the silence that you get once the proposal is in the organization. And how are you going to deal with that? And one of the things that he talked about doing was coming up with a plan to contact the customer, not necessarily about the proposal, but about adjacent type
Mhm.
things to keep your name and thought and name and proposal in the customer's mind
Yeah.
rather than here's the proposal, we'll talk to you in 2 months time when we've made that choice. Because it's interesting, isn't it? It's that who do you speak to last. So even if you're dropping them a message going, hey, did you see the football at the weekend, and what do you think about this or whatever else, it's keeping your name and your thoughts in their minds, basically. So Anyway, that's nothing to do with Jason's thing, but I thought I'd
It
mention it.
seems like a good bit of sales advice, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I think it's just
recognizing,
making it personal, and it's
yeah,
just keeping you top of mind, basically. I'm a great believer that you've got to be in the right place at the right time, basically.
yep.
And if you're in the right place at the right time, then that deals with a lot. Okay, so any further advice to young Jason? How does he mentally decide it's crossing the Rubicon?
Yeah, look for those changes in look for the evidence of changes in mindset, changes in
Yeah,
perspective. Are they asking different questions? Are they seeking out different information? Are they talking about things in a different way, more abstract, more concrete? All those kinds of things can be these subtle signals that show that they have changed the way they're thinking about this, that they've already made their decision.
you see, and this is why I love doing this podcast, mate, because I come into this going, well, here are all the practical things. And then you put a framework around it and going, well, that's exactly what you're talking about. Here's
That's
the
right.
research, and this is goes to show deliberative and implementation, and yeah. So
And
there you
here's a bit
go.
of Roman history to sweeten the pot.
Just to top it off, why
That's
not?
right.
Who doesn't love a piece of Roman history?
There we go.
So good. Well,
Next
we
time
hope
we'll talk
that's.
about segmentation and Caligula.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a reach, but there you go. So we hope that's been of use. If we can ask you one favour, and that would be just if you can spend a bit of time just doing a quick review for us, that would be really great. If you wouldn't mind doing that, that really helps us get up the algorithms and get out to more and more people. And Ryan and I just love hearing about how we're doing. So if you could do a review on whatever platform you're on, that would be wonderful. And thanks very much. And we look forward to talking to you next week. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.